Thank you for listening to Season 10, Episode 3 of the Love Letters podcast. And joining me for a post-episode conversation is Christine Ahanotu, our producer. Yeah. So we went to the fancy part of Cambridge where there are lots of scientists for this episode.
We did. That was
and it's like, for those not from here, can you describe like what that neighborhood is? It's Kendall Square, and it's basically MIT.
It's like labs,
Harvard,
scientists,
a lot of people in white coats.
smart people,
A
brains.
lot of brains, which is what brought us there. But I will say about this neighborhood that when lockdown was happening, you know, it's also where Moderna is, right? It's also where these pharma companies are in a lot of cases. And I would drive through and kind of see what the lab people were doing during lockdown. If they were eating outside, I'd be like, well, if they're eating outside,
oh, wow.
I think I could eat outside.
Were they eating outside?
They were eating at the restaurants out there. But I was so scared that I was like, well, they probably know, right? That these are people really in the mix of it. So, but it's a quite a bustling neighborhood of scientific people.
It's interesting because I wasn't in Boston during COVID, so I'm always interested to hear, like, were people outside? Like, you know.
Yeah. I mean, it was, and there especially. So I'm also obsessed with the Broad Institute, which everybody heard about in this episode, because it's like the nexus of all of these organizations, like, you know, the hospital, like MGH, it's MIT, all of these people who want to make our health better convening in one place. Mm-hmm. And it's also kind of intimidating, but as you can probably tell, like, you know, Dr. Hyman did not make us feel terrible about ourselves for not understanding most things about our minds.
Yeah, it's a pro and a con, this one, though. This episode was like, positive and kind of negative. I mean, we don't have to feel bad that we can't change it, but also at one point you probably can't.
So this was like an up and down episode because we have this great scientist, Dr. Hyman, who's telling us about our brains and how it works. And he's pretty positive, right? But it's also kind of a bummer because he's looking at, especially somebody like me, who is like very much in my 40s, and he's like, you're like kind of like, you know, when you see a concrete like sidewalk, like I have
poured concrete.
Yeah. I am a set piece of concrete, and somebody younger might be a lot more plastic in their ability to change for the better, which is tough. And, you know, I just wondered if you left that episode feeling like, oh, okay, change is possible, or wait, did we just hear it's not possible?
Yeah, it was kind of both, you know. It was, it took some of the pressure off that when you can't change things that maybe we don't have the ability to. But I gotta say, it was kind of depressing because you're like, you always hope that you can. And I think you can, as he said, sometimes with help, sometimes with the proper support. But generally we are stuck in our ways at one point, and that's kind of, a beautiful tragedy.
The thing I took from it that made me happier was that there are changes I can make, and I can leave the ones aside that I know I can't make. Like, there's certain ways I'm always going to be, and I can love myself no matter what. But there is a lot I can do to be better about experiencing the world. I mean, we talk in the episode about me going to Chicago and trying like deep dish pizza, right? And like doing all the self-care work to be able to get to that place so I can enjoy the pizza. And for me, that means being on the right antidepressant, right? Or anti-anxiety medication, taking care of my mental health. Like, these are all things that I specifically need to do. Yeah. Even sleeping well and hydrating and all of the things. Like, sometimes I think like the world is ending, and maybe it is, but also I haven't had a glass of water in like 15 hours. And that's important, right? To sort of do what we can to, especially I feel like at my age, to like start at a place that makes sense. If I'm not having a little bit of exercise, like everything made me feel more accountable for change, but in a way that was manageable. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, I think sorry, I'm sitting here thinking about the fact that you admitted to us brain scientist that you did Adderall.
I know. And you are correct to say I did Adderall, because when you do a drug that is not prescribed to you, that's the verb to use, right?
I did it. Yeah.
I didn't take
and
Adderall.
And he also
that was
laughed at it. I was like blown away. In the interview, I was like, is he laughing? Is he saying like...
Well, he's a scientist, right? So he's not considering
He was like, highly recommend it. Do you remember
he says highly recommend. I mean, he's kidding, right? He's not saying we should.
Of course.
But he is someone who's like, really interestingly, like considering the chemistry and what the effects of the drug are. Like, he's not considering what in my personality made me take somebody else's Adderall. I know what parts of those my person. And by the way, I did this and I was like freaking out, like, oh, what if my body rejects this, right?
Yeah.
But he does, right? He was like, you probably had a great day, and I did,
And you did.
and I
Yeah.
did. So yeah, I think I was also bummed and excited to hear that he feels like we are only part of the way where we need to be to like really help people change. So this idea that I think that being on my antidepressant makes me a wildly different person. He's like, oh, I'm so glad you feel that way, but we're not there yet.
Yeah.
That, I thought it was interesting how many times he brought up Ozempic as now we know it takes this
Yeah.
to help people change their bodies. And we made them feel terrible for a really long time about a lot of things. And I'm like, what is the Ozempic of some of this mental health stuff we talked about?
Yeah, I think there is also an element that's kind of, I don't know, and this might be, where you kind of have to be careful, because when you say that, and I do agree that the bringing up of the Ozempic was very enlightening, and I think very freeing for people that have struggled with, with their weight and who struggle to get off the weight. But then there's like another side of that, which, and if people keep listening through the season, there is an element of behavior that can be affected. And I think, if we just say like, oh, I can't do the thing, it's my brain, we're not gonna, that's also not the full answer. So I think as we examine throughout the rest of the season, there's different pieces to it. But yeah, it feels good to be able to let some of the stuff go. Some of the stuff that you feel like you can't control that you keep coming back to,
We're going to talk to other experts this season about change. His lens is so specific. Like, can you literally change? And asking him about Fumi, saying, from our first episode, she took a clown class, changed. Is it true? And he says yes, right? Because she's young enough to absolutely get out of her anxiety.
Rewire her brain.
Is that how you define change? Because I really feel like I've made a lot of changes that maybe aren't change with a capital C, but they're definitely change with a lowercase c.
What is the question? If I define change by my brain being rewired?
Well, so like we're going to talk to other experts about changing habits versus changing the core of who we are.
Yeah.
And I think for Dr. Hyman, it's like only one really counts. Like, he's saying, yes, you can change how often you exercise, maybe, but like, are we truly changed as a person? Maybe not. But like, I think the small changes are important too.
Yeah, and I think habits. So for me, I would say, and maybe part of why I resisted a lot of the things in this episode was because I feel like I've changed a lot throughout my life. Granted, I am at a certain age, right?
Yeah.
So maybe it was all possible, and now
you're like,
I'm slowly setting next to you on the sidewalk, Meredith, in the sidewalk as a piece of concrete.
You're plastic as
I'm slightly plastic. I'm probably stiffening up as we go. Sorry, weird saying. But I guess the point is, I think habits and behavior can counteract ways that you are. And I think that is our power. And I think maybe it's important to keep that in mind because, we talked about addiction in this episode. There's so many ways that people feel victims of their chemistry. And so I think for me, it's a mixture of both, but I would say behavior is important. And if you do a different behavior than what you want to do for like 10 years, like say you want to just, you don't want to exercise. Like Concrete Meredith is like, no, I'm good. That's just not who I am. But like you go out there and you work out every day for a year, you're going to change. Even if it's just that you have now a habit that is part of your life and you do that thing, you have changed,
Well, I also think it's like,
even if you still don't want to.
Well, yeah, and I can exercise a little bit, not a lot. But there's also like a domino effect too, right? Of like, that's the kind of thing, or even like if it's less screen time or less social media time, like whatever it is, I open myself up and I do something more of what I like that feeds my soul. And then it's like this, again, I think I keep going back to Chicago of all the things that had to happen for me to be able to not like be unhappy on that trip. And it's like, yeah. I have to believe, I know Dr. Hyman is very smart and very fancy.
Very smart guy.
Lots of equations on whiteboards.
Yeah. Lots of degrees and like accolades. And
totally. And I believe him, but I also think that I left feeling like there's a lot I can do to be different in the way that I want to be different.
Yeah.
So, interestingly, like thinking about his definition of change moving forward, I still think a lot of our guests to come have gone through big changes and that it counts.
Yeah, and the definition of change is, I think, kind of constantly moving, depending on the situation.
All right, so we are also an advice column, so people can send in letters and we run them anonymously and we answer them. I answer them, and I always tell people I'm absolutely not a licensed mental health professional. That's why I write an advice column. Most people who are a licensed mental health professional do not. Many of them don't, at least. But I love the idea that when people share their problems and a journalist like takes a stab at it, like everyone who feels that way and feels that they have that problem too feels a little bit seen. So I love when people share. And there are some letters that made me think about this episode and what Dr. Hyman said, and it put my answer in a different context for me.
Okay.
But I want to know what you think, because I always do. This is a letter. Meredith, I've thought about doing something like this for a while, so here we go. By the way, I love a letter that starts this way. I thought about writing, and now I'm writing. Dear Meredith, I've thought about doing something like this for a while, so here we go. I had a boyfriend of 2 years, and he broke up with me. Surprisingly, it was not a hard breakup, and I just kind of got over it. But now it's a year later, and I don't want to date anyone. It's like no matter what I do, I find no interest in dating, even if I want to date. It's not that I want to have alone time. I would love to date someone, but I just don't want anyone. Should I push myself and date someone? Am I hiding my feeling of missing my old boyfriend? I'm tired of being alone, but what should I do? And the reason this letter is important to me is because we get a lot of letters about dating fatigue. This like desire to have love and connections and an absolute apathy toward the process. Like the idea of going on an app is so overwhelming. And it's not so much not wanting to date, it's not wanting the process of dating, the misery of a first date, all of these things. So like, especially within the context of our episode, what would you think to tell this person?
It's funny. I think of that meme that's like, I don't know if you've seen it. It's like a video meme, and it's after you've been in a long relationship and you get out of it. The idea of like going from like super deep intimacy to like, what's your favorite color? Is like mind numbing. You're like, oh, I have to do all of that again to get back to that place. So I think, how old did she say she was?
She did not, but I suspect there's youth.
Youth, yeah.
I don't know. I mean, at least in the part of life where you're looking to build a world.
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe you're just not in the mood to date, and I think that's okay. I think there's pressure to always be dating, and even if you're interested in dating, it just sounded like she was like, I'm interested in dating as a concept, but when she thinks about it, she doesn't want to. And I think forcing yourself is probably the worst way to do it, because you'll probably end up in a relationship with someone you barely like. You might end up married with 5 kids, but you'd be like, wow, if I had just not pushed myself to date 10 years ago, I would be, who knows where. Yeah.
I mean, I definitely feel like, as somebody who has taken many years off in my life, like, yeah, if you don't want to do it, don't do it. This one is a little complicated because it's like, I kind of want to do it, I don't want to do it.
But that's what's confusing. Is
yeah,
I don't know.
It's hard. It makes me think about the episode, though, which is that it's like all about getting to Chicago to enjoy the pizza. Like, what are the things you can do so that having the new and interesting experience doesn't feel like work, and then it feels like something you can be excited about? This idea of like having a salient experience that affects you greatly and in a good way. And I don't think this letter writer is fully there, but can probably do some work to get there.
And it sounds like, but maybe part of it is too, that her brain is stuck. Like to what you just said, that she does need that salience. Maybe going on a new date will spark something, because maybe it's like, her brain transitioned like, okay, I'm not dating now. And now it's like in a not dating mode, and it just needs a jump start. Now, if she's like in her mid to late 30s, she could be settling into concrete, and she should really start trying to stretch those. Yeah.
I mean, it's hard.
Keep it going.
When I get these letters about dating fatigue, like, part of me is like, you take your time off, you spend time alone. Like, you don't have to do anything. Like, you don't even have to meet anybody ever. It's okay. And then there's a part of me that's like, you don't want to ever get too comfortable. And that doesn't just have to be about dating, but like sometimes it's a lot easier to do the thing we keep doing. And so continuing to challenge yourself with new experiences, like it doesn't have to be dating, just make sure it's something.
Yeah.
Okay. This letter also reminds me of the episode. My boyfriend and I are newly graduated college alumni who have been together for about 3 years. We met in Boston and have decided to stay here and pursue the next steps of our lives together. My question is for college sweethearts. How do you know you have found your life partner when you have few other romantic experiences? We were both of each other's firsts for so many things, including long-term serious relationships. Our love feels right, and we both speak about getting married. But I know in the back of our minds, we both wonder if it's naive to marry the first person you date as an adult. Is it a crazy idea to spend your entire life with just one person in the 21st century? I cannot stop thinking about what Dr. Hyman said about this, because I have a lot of friends who got together in their early 20s and they're incredible couples. And then I have friends who got together with people in their 30s and 40s, and that made a lot more sense to them. But what we know from Dr. Hyman is like your brain is like still forming. And this is such a big question for me, which is some of those couples that got together really young grew and solidified as concrete together. Mm-hmm. And they had the benefit of like choosing a path together. Like, I'm a weirdo now. I don't want to change what I do. On the other hand, it can be really hard to know what you want for a future when you're still plastic.
See, Meredith, this is why I am not an advice columnist, because I can never give a straight, I mean, to me, I'd say, is it crazy to stay with the same person for your whole life in the 21st century? I think that's a weird, not weird that they asked it, but like a weird concept to put it in the context of the 21st century. Because now that everyone dates so many people and, has so many relationships, which was not normal 50 years ago or 100 years ago, that now it's weird if you fall in love at 20. And you might get to 40 and be like, I wish I had slept with more people. I wish I dated more people. But you might also solidify into concrete together and have a beautiful life and a beautiful home. And like, let me tell you, dating, I have this might be a little controversial, but I think the more people you date, the more complicated it can get as you get older. Because like, you've experienced so many different types of people. Some work for you in different ways. And then, you're asking the question like, who do I pick? This one or this one? And now we have the apps, and it's like, you can get lost in that. So I think if you find a love and the love's good, and that's at any age, follow that,
I do think it's interesting. A lot of people meet a wonderful love around this age and like don't question it. Or maybe they question a little bit, but they say, I'm just going to keep waking up every day and choosing this person. Yeah. I think it's a little interesting that they're nervous. But what I would say also is that everyone I've talked to who coupled up with someone they met that young, they've experienced multiple relationships within that relationship. Mm. They talk about eras of marriage. One friend was like, I've definitely had 3 marriages all to the same person. Mm-hmm. The time that they spent in their 20s was not like the time that they're spending in their 40s as parents. So I also don't think you actually miss out on a bunch of experiences. You're going to change. You're going to have good days and bad days and all of this stuff. And it's not like you're going to still be the same 2 people in the dorm room, like playing a video game, like forever. Listen, by being single for a really long time, I missed out on couple stuff. You're always going to be missing out on something. So if you really love what you have, I think it's interesting that it would be harder for me to tell somebody now to walk away from someone great. And so, I don't know. If
they're having like active thoughts about sleeping with other people, then maybe you're not married yet, like maybe follow that urge. But if the question is more, it seems, are we going to regret it? Not we do regret it, then just follow what's working. Because hey, you could date 1,000 people and get to your late 30s, early 40s, whenever, later in life, and then feel like, okay, now I've done the thing and I've tasted the world and I'm ready, and then that marriage can fall apart or that relationship can fall apart. There's no right way.
I mean, I also think that even within my friendships, like we became adults together. Mm-hmm. So even with that, like the wet concrete to solid, like there are other people that are you don't ditch everybody, from your early days. I do also think it's interesting. She mentions 21st century because like I read a lot of romance novels and they're all set in Regency times, and like everybody's just like kicking it young.
Kicking it young, like getting together young and being married.
Like dying. Like it's so interesting to tell a story of like the Bridgerton era where like it's common and it's like 1810 and people are like, they're constantly bringing up illnesses we don't even have anymore. And it's like, sure, get married at 18. It's fine.
But I also feel like I have friends that got together in high school and they're together, they have kids now, and we're in our mid 30s, and it's like, they'll probably, I mean, if it's what they want, they'll be together forever, but like, a lot of them have halfway grown kids, and I'm like, they might end up getting the kids to adulthood, getting divorced, and having a whole nother life.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that's kind of cool too. You
And-
know,
and I
they already
do-
did the kid thing, and they get a whole different version versus the opposite.
And I do hope that with all of these Love Letters episodes, that's something we can say, which is that like everyone who's had a relationship end, like I want them to know that it wasn't like wasted time.
Yeah.
Like this is like, yeah, this couple could get together and drop each other, but like it's still an experience. You can't try to predict what is the best path. Just know if you're having a good time on it right now.
Yeah, and
if
it's
it
a
seems
story.
healthy.
I mean, I think our loves of our lives they're part of our story, and
Yeah.
tell a good one. You know.
Well, I would like to go to the Broad Institute for all of my problems. I'm sure all of the scientists will be really happy to hear me ask a bunch of questions. So this episode is really important for the next episode we have, which deals with some of the stuff we talked about with the brain. So thanks for listening, and I hope you'll join us again.